The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
This month's topic is, of course, how do we do amazing pre-proposal meetings? What works, what doesn't work, and so let's go ahead and dive in here. So today's agenda is a couple things that we're going to talk about is, what is the purpose of a pre-proposal meeting? We'll give some background on why we think that's something to think about, and if you do have to do those, what does that look like? Talk about this hot topic of should be mandatory or not. There's some interesting perspectives about that. We'll have a little poll here today too, so get your mouses ready, or mice ready, and be ready to do that. We'll talk about the logistics of the meeting, and finally, how to actually present the information as part of our pre-proposal meeting. So when you think about an effective pre-proposal meeting, there's really three main things that we need to focus on. The first thing to keep in mind here is that the goal of this meeting is to educate and inform the suppliers or vendors about the project itself. It's to help them better understand what your needs are, what your goals are as an organization looking to buy this particular service. The second thing that you want to help them with is how to submit their best proposal. I mean, if you had a situation where every single supplier proposal was amazing, that would be a really good thing to have, right? The better quality proposals make your job easier as procurement. It makes your evaluators' job easier because now they have good quality content to look at. And the more we can do to help improve the overall quality of those presentations, that can definitely, we want to see that happen. And that's why we want to see better quality proposals. And last, of course, is to encourage them to participate, or in other words, submit a proposal on our projects. Those are the three main things to keep in mind here about our pre-proposal meetings. So what does a typical meeting look like? Here's what we kind of recommend as we go through and think about how do we spend this 45 minutes to an hour long meeting and how we structure that. The first thing we'll do is I'd have your client, the end customer, to come in and give a high level summary of what the scope of work is on the project, focusing on what are the goals and objectives for why they are having this RFP done. In other words, what is driving, what are the business drivers for them to have this RFP out in the street? The best people to do this, like I said, are the actual end client or the customers who are going to be receiving the contract, or those that are going to work with the vendors that, if awarded, the ones that are going to be firsthand directly involved in them. For them to say to the industry, here's what we're looking to get, is really beneficial. After that's done, then you as procurement would come up and review the procedural requirements for the RFP process. Again, you're not going line by line or page by page here, but highlighting the key critical things that folks need to be aware of in terms of how do they submit a proposal without being kicked out. That's kind of the main things we're focused on with that. And then finally, thirdly, is to give an opportunity for a Q&A with our suppliers to ask questions, clarifications, anything else they want to ask about the project. So one thing to keep in mind here as we go through this here is, do we even need a pre-proposal meeting, right? Do we even have to do those, right? So there's a couple of perspectives that we have about it. The first one is, do we need a pre-proposal meeting? The answer is, well, maybe. It depends. If your project is small, relatively simple, not a lot of complex scope items to it, there's not a lot of politics, then we probably don't need to do that, right? You can just come in, you may not need to have a pre-proposal meeting, just have the RFP and then send that out. The other option you could do is, if it's a relatively straightforward project, is to pre-record a video and to post that to a website. That's another potential option to tell people about the project without actually having a formal pre-proposal meeting. The other idea here is that while you do need it, in our opinion, is if the project is complex, if there's lots of politics, regardless if it's complex or not, then technically, And of course, we would strongly recommend that if you have any sort of IT, software, hardware type of project, you absolutely need to have a pre-proposal meeting, right? Now, with that said here is, if we have our meeting or not, should we make it mandatory, right? So the way this would work, if you have a mandatory meeting, is that the vendors, if they don't show up, they don't attend, they don't sign in, they're disqualified. They can't submit, they can't propose, totally disqualified for doing this. The reason why many times owners typically require a attendance at the pre-proposal meetings is to make sure that they hear critical information about the project, so that when you present something, if there's something that's critical to the project, that you want to make sure the vendors don't miss that information here. So that's why we have pre-proposal meetings. Pre-proposal meetings. Man, that's hard to say. Say that 10 times really fast. Pre-proposal meeting. Okay, let's do a quick poll here. And I want to ask you all is, do you think pre-proposal meetings should be required or not for our meetings here? So let me go ahead and get this set up here. And here we go. So I have a question is, do you think pre-proposal meetings should be mandatory or not? So go ahead and take a few minutes here and answer the survey questions here. Again, everybody, board participation is better. Should it be mandatory? Yes, maybe, or nope. Do what you want. All right, a few more minutes here, a couple more seconds. All right. 5 more seconds, we'll shut this thing down. Okay. Okay, so here's the results. So 70% of you say, well, it depends. Depends on the project, depends on the scope. It really depends on whether or not a mandatory pre-proposal meeting should actually be required. Okay, that's what we typically see when we go through this here, right? So let's actually dive into this a little more detail about whether or not this should be mandatory. So let's keep going here. So our take, CP's take on mandatory is you need to be careful with that, right? The first thing to think about is that if you're concerned that if you make it mandatory, and so that make sure that vendors actually get the key critical information, our perspective, if there's something you're going to present in that meeting that is really critical, it should already be in the RFP. In other words, there shouldn't be anything new that's addressed in that meeting that's not already inside of your RFP. If you miss something or somebody asked a question that you realize, oh shoot, this is really critical, then issue an addenda that clarifies that. So that's the first thing to keep in mind here. There shouldn't be anything at that meeting that is not already inside of the RFP. The other thing about making meetings not mandatory is that this is less administrative burden. So depending on the size of your project and how many vendors might have an interest in it, going through and checking every single line item against who actually proposed on that can be quite time consuming. So if you do require mandatory attendance and you have to verify who actually attended against the proposals, again, a huge time suck to actually do that. The third thing to think about here too is like, what if somebody can't get to the meeting? Car accident, airplane is late, whatever, then how do you deal with that? Is it tough luck, right? Do we have a tough luck approach here? Or is it, well, you didn't attend, we understand, so we'll make an exception. And obviously we all know that that can lead to protests and we don't want to deal with that either. We had a project once, it was building, I don't know, it was $40–50 million, basically state run or state participated in hotel where they're going to build a new development center, hotel, the whole 9 yards, pretty nice amenities. They had the pre-proposal meeting. They had 2 firms there, so it was a pretty small meeting. They kept going on their schedule. A week after the pre-proposal meeting is that they had 3 or 4 other companies say, hey, we just saw this RFP, we would love to participate, but because they required it mandatory, they weren't allowed to propose on that particular project. So my encouragement as you think about this here is that if you're going to require it, then we really need to make sure it's actually required. In our view, it's not always like that. Okay, let's kind of shift gears here a little bit and think about some of the logistical requirements about what we need to think about for the actual meeting itself, room requirement. I know this might seem pretty straightforward here, but I've seen some meetings where this wasn't done, and it makes it really difficult. The first thing is think about how many people might attend the meeting. We had a meeting once, this is years and years ago, somebody else had set it up. And at this meeting, it was for basically furniture services. There was 150 people at the meeting. So it was like standing room only. The room had about 70 or 80 seats. Very, very uncomfortable, very awkward because there's not enough seats for people to sit down. So make sure we have enough seats for everybody that's going to be at the meeting. Make sure we can get to it, projector, computer, the whole 9 yards, make sure it works, right? The other thing too with this is that you don't need coffee, food, copies of the RFPs to hand out. I've seen meetings where they hand out, everybody that walks in gets a hard copy of the RFP. As much as I like stale bagels and warm water as the next guy, you don't need to do those things here. This is a business meeting. Just dive straight into what we're focused on here. With regard to physical copies of the RFPs, it's a digital world in many aspects. Obviously, many of us with COVID have gone completely digital. And so I think that the cost to do that, the time and effort, it's just not there. If they want to print it out, fine, do it on their own time, own dime, and we don't need to provide that. We may also provide virtual meetings. Virtual meetings, depending on the overall complexity of the project, I would really be cognizant of whether or not something that we should actually do. Because if the project requires us to review the physical space of where we're working at, like construction or some sort of like janitorial services type contract, it's really beneficial to actually physically see the site. Now, you can still do with a virtual meeting that have physical site walks later on here, but people like to see what's going on. And also, many times people are able to learn, I would say, a little bit more effectively by having in-person meetings. So just keep that in mind here as you think about and structure what these are. If you do decide to have a virtual meeting, make sure that your license account for this has enough seats. There's been Zoom meetings in the past where people try to log in and there's like a 100-seat limit, and now you've got a situation where people that wanted to get in but can't get in. So make sure your Zoom or Teams or whatever accounts you're looking at have enough licensed seats to actually let people in to do that. The other thing I'd recommend too here is that there's nothing more frustrating, and Brian and I have done dozens of webinars, and things seem to be okay now here, but there's nothing more frustrating to have a Zoom meeting and the presenter can't figure out how to turn the slides, or they share the whole screen, not the slide deck, or whatever, right? Make sure you're proficient in terms of running the slides so that it's a professional or high quality presentation of the information. Regardless of how you do it, make sure you have sign-in sheets. The biggest reason why we do that is that the sign-in sheets obviously tell us who's there, but more importantly is that as a vendor, especially when there's going to be a large project, perhaps a general contractor or somebody that's kind of large that might partner with subs to provide these services, that sign-in sheet is crucial for them to find out and see who is at the meeting, who has an interest in a project, and then to partner up with them as they go forward and deliver on that particular project. So having sign-in sheets that you publicly post after the meeting is super beneficial. Now let's dive into the format of the meeting itself here. We just got a couple more slides and we'll break out into our breakout rooms. At the actual meeting, for introductions, has anybody ever been in a meeting where everybody goes round robin and they introduce themselves, right? That is absolutely not the thing to do in a pre-proposal meeting. So who you should introduce though is the lead procurement person, the lead client person, and then if there's some sort of owner, executive type person at the meeting, it might be good or beneficial to have them give their support and interest in the project. But that's it. You don't need to introduce all the evaluators. You don't need to introduce all these ancillary people. Keep it short and dive into the main content of the meeting. The other thing to keep about mind here too, as you go through and present this, is that having a PowerPoint slide deck that highlights the key things about what you want to present is super beneficial. I had another pre-proposal meeting once where the procurement agent, they pulled up the RFP, and I am not exaggerating, folks. They read word for word, line for line for about 20 minutes directly out of the RFP. Now, if you've done that yourself before, that's okay. That's why we're here to learn about this. But the tone that gives and the overall stage that sets for the procurement is not a good one. So have a PowerPoint slide that actually summarizes the key things that you want to focus on here. Now you might think, well, I can just go through the RFP, just highlight key things. You can do that too, but I find that having a PowerPoint slide that organizes my thoughts extremely beneficial to keep about that. Now, again, if you think about this, and the chat box is on fire right now, so hopefully, Brian, you've got your eyes on this here. But we have a really good question from Jeannie about if it's a virtual meeting, how do we deal with the sign-in sheets? So there's a couple ways you can do that. There's simple free forms like Google. You can do just go to this website, type in your name, and it'll auto-populate, right? Margaret suggests you can just have them email them. That's fine too. But there's online tools that are free. You can just have everybody go to this website, fill out your name, and it's good to go. And Zoom and other platforms where you can track the attendees, which is likely all for you to change your names. Those are other options as well. But again, Sign Up Genius, Google Forms, go on there, type in their names and email, good to go. Okay. The other thing you want to think about here too, that now this is not a discussion of how to give presentations, but just some key things here that I've seen over the years in running a variety of procurements. The first thing is that as the presenter, you don't need to be an all-star public speaker. So if you're concerned about that, or you have a junior procurement person that is going to be doing this, they don't need to be a professional speaker to do this effectively. What they need to do is just think about the key things to present and present that information. Don't read the slides, don't pack in too much here. And again, our goal here is not to have 100 slides. What I think about here, depending on what you want to do here, is the 5x5 rule. 5 slides, 5 bullets, 5 words per bullet. Just something along those lines, or an overall perspective about how you think about this is kind of what we're thinking about, 5x5. All right, death by PowerPoint is not something we want here. Now, like I mentioned, we'll have 2 key people that are going to do most of the presentation. The first part of this is the scope of work, or the actual customer client who's going to be providing this information. So keep it a high level. You don't want them to read everything because they do have this solicitation. Goals and objectives, why, as a client, why is this project important to you? What are the key things we need to think about as we go through and deliver this particular project, right? That's what you want to, the customer, the end client buying the service or project, that's what you want them to communicate. From the procurement standpoint, there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. Again, like I said, don't read every single section. Spend your time on focusing on things in the past where vendors have struggled. If there's been certain areas that they just haven't submitted correctly, or things that are just not done, or they have a lot of questions on, it is worth it to spend your time to highlight these things as part of the pre-proposal meeting to make sure they're aware of, typically here's where people struggle on things here. This might sound a little bit different, or a way to think about it here, but your role as a procurement person running this meeting is to teach people. You're a teacher as part of this meeting, which I know sounds kind of crazy or a little bit different from how we normally think about it. But our goal here is to help the vendors put together better quality proposals. So we need to educate or teach them about here's the types of things that we're looking for, here's how this works, and answer any questions, right? Some of these areas that you might want to spend time on. In the past, I've seen that like good faith efforts, or maybe WEBE requirements, minority-owned or women-owned businesses. Sometimes I've seen that there's a lot of questions about that. And so that's a good example of something that might be worth it to spend a little bit extra time about how to do that here. Q&A. So after you go through the content, you'll close out the meeting with Q&A. Again, this is to allow the vendors to ask questions and clarify their thoughts here. Now, if you're going through your presentations and you've got to the end and there's no questions, we have a special award for that. That's called the Perfect RFP Award. And if you get to your end and there's no questions, then let us know, because we will send you the Perfect RFP Award. Most likely what's happened though is we don't have questions that we've talked too fast. We've gone through too much information and haven't actually given vendors time to sit here and think about what's being presented. So the way I would overcome that is I would have like milepost or signposting throughout your presentations of, okay, this particular topic is confusing typically, or this is really important. We're going to take questions here. So have signposts throughout your presentation of where you expect to have questions. You want the vendors to ask questions. That's a really good thing. It encourages their participation and it makes sure they have time to think about what's going on. Now, depending on the nature of the questions, there's a couple of different things to think about. And Brian says, if you don't have questions, there's scary things to come. Yes, that is also true. We don't want that. Depending on the questions, if it's a minor question, you can address that at the meeting. If it's a very simple minor thing, that's totally fine. Major questions that are like, wow, okay, I hadn't really thought about that. A couple of things, a couple of thoughts on that. One, it's okay to say, I don't know, we'll get back to you. That's far better than making up an answer, right? Nobody's going to second judge us or second guess us if we say, I don't know, but we need to get back to you, right? It's okay to say, I don't know. It's much better than making up an answer. The second thing to do too is that the vendors do ask a complicated or risky or difficult question. You'll get back to them, but what they also need to do is submit that question in writing. Very, very important, because you want to answer not their question or verify or answer something that is not actually what they were asking about. So make sure they submit their questions in writing. That's absolutely something crucial to do. Like I said, submit questions in writing. The other thing to remind them too at the end of the meeting is not to communicate with anyone besides the lead buyer. Review the schedule, just make sure they know the dates. Folks, this is not a scheduling presentation, but as best as you possibly can, stick to the schedule that you provide in your RFP. Now, I understand that things come up, different things happen. I understand that, but I am telling you, I was working on a procurement recently where the owner pushed back some dates on a project by, I don't know, almost a month, 6 weeks. I mean, that change in the schedule costs the vendors literally thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, because they had planned out their entire schedules to be around these interview dates there. So just make sure that as much as you possibly can, stick to the dates in the schedule as best you can. Provide the slides after the meeting, attendee list as an addenda. Again, don't allow internal personnel to have one-on-one meetings. That's just ripe for a protest, ethical considerations, and so just kind of keep that in mind. So that's the end of the actual meeting itself. Very briefly here, depending on the scope of the project, you may want to have a site walk. Typically, I would do this or tie this to the meeting itself. So let's say you have a morning meeting, 9 to 10 a.m. for the site walk, or excuse me, for the meeting, and then after that, you go straight to the site walk. Sometimes I had a project once where they had a meeting, and then the sites were spread out through about 6 different sites throughout the city. And so what we did here is we just scheduled times that the city staff would be available at each particular location. So, 12 to 2 on this date, 12 to 2 on this other date, and here's where we'll be at. That's one way to do it. Other times I had a project in the middle of COVID where the nature required site walks, and the way we dealt with that is that people just signed up. We kept social distancing. The first 30 minutes was vendor 1, the next 30 minutes was vendor 2, and so forth. So you can deal with that, but the point is having site walks can be really beneficial for the vendors to actually see, okay, now I better understand what's actually going to happen with the site. The way this format will work for the site walks, again, you're going to walk to the site walk, point out anything critical. So if you are like the client or the customer buying this, pointing out key features of the building you look to change or some nuances of the space, these might be beneficial things for you to point out as you go through and go through the site walk. Again, you can answer questions, but if it's something major, the vendor really needs to submit that in writing and not just say, well, verbally, this is what they told me. Verbal answers from anybody don't mean anything. Make sure you get everything in writing, because that's absolutely crucial. So in summary here, the pre-proposal meeting and the sidewalks are not just another annoying step in the procurement process. It's a really an excellent tool to strengthen the overall quality of the proposals that you receive, and to make sure that everybody understands here's what we're really trying to get out of this project here. I found that when pre-proposal meetings go well, vendors greatly appreciate it. I mean, we've had, I know Brian's have a couple of meetings where we end the meeting and it's like a standing ovation. People clap hands, very excited, because, oh, it's like a breath of fresh air, right? They actually have an organized meeting that provides relevant information is super beneficial, right? So make sure that you have a quality, top-notch meeting, and people enjoy that for sure.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.